that you can't be a good citizen or a good resident, you can't be a moral person if you're not willing to look hard and open your eyes to the reality before you. Open your eyes. Some of you know the film, but she couldn't have had that responsibility had her eyes not been open. So step one in being an activist or a moral person or a citizen or a resident is you have to open your eyes. You have to see the world as it is. And that's not something you can do once and then codify it in ideology and let it run on automatic pilot forever. You have to open your eyes again and again, every day, every hour, every incident, every something that comes up. You have to re-ask yourself, what's happening now? And am I aware now? But the key requirement is you have to wake up. There's a marvelous poem by Mary Oliver that has, in the middle of the poem, she has a little section called Instructions for Living a Life. And the instructions for living a life are, pay attention, be astonished, do something. That's pretty good advice for all of us. Pay attention, open your eyes, be astonished at both the good and the bad, the horrors and the ecstasy, the joy and the wonder of the world as we find it, and then do something. I would add a fourth thing, which I'll get to in a minute. The fourth thing is to then doubt that what you did meant anything and start over. Pay attention, be astonished, act, doubt. Pay attention, be astonished, act, doubt. That's what I think we have to do. So paying attention means opening your eyes. So Dora is one example. Some of you know the Nobel laureate José Saramago, who wrote a wonderful book called Blindness. It was the first of his books, Portuguese Nobel laureate, translated into English, and it became a film with Susan Sarandon, and quite a good film, actually. But Blindness is the story of a man stuck in some unnamed city in Russia, and he suddenly goes blind. And chaos breaks out. It's rush hour, and he's stuck at a stoplight. He can't see. Somebody comes and helps him from the car. Somebody else steals his car, and he's helped home. And his wife takes him to a clinic, and everyone in the eye clinic has gone blind mysteriously, a dozen people. So they're quarantined behind a wall. And slowly, 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 everyone goes blind. First the guards who are guarding them, and then the rest of society. And what happens after 30 pages of sinking into this terrible, terrible condition of a mysterious blindness sweeping the whole society is people do some terrible things. And it gets worse and worse. Gangs group together to steal food, and to hoard food, and to hoard housing. Gangs of men rape women. Criminal gangs take prey on the weaker gangs, and so on. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And when it's at the very bottom of this horror show, suddenly, just as suddenly and just as mysteriously, the first guy's eyes come back. Suddenly he can see. And then another, and then another. Eventually they all can see. And they hug each other a little warily because they've just done horrible things to each other. But someone cries out, "Why did we go blind? And why can we now see?" And the narrator says, "Perhaps we didn't go blind. Perhaps we were blind. Blind people who could see, seeing people who were blind." Think about what Saramago is telling us. He's telling us that that's our condition. We are seeing people who are blind. We are blind people who can see. We actually know way more than we want to bring to the front of our consciousness today. Way more. We know there's an AIDS epidemic in Africa. We know that. We know that torture is taking place in our name. We know that. We know that drones are killing American citizens. We know without trial, without warrant. We know that. We know that the word justice is used for revenge. That's not a mystery. We can see that. But we don't want to bring it all together and say, yes, I see, I see. We have to open our eyes to a world at war. We have to open our eyes to see that the United States spends $1 trillion on war, more than the rest of the world put together. That we have 150 military bases around the world. That we're in a state of continuous war. And why? What is the war? We know that we relied into Iraq, just as we relied into Vietnam. We know that. And so what is preventing us from taking the next step? We are blind people who can see. And once we can see, we have a responsibility to act. There's a wonderful, wonderful book by J.M. Coetzee called Waiting for the Barbarians, about a magistrate in some outpost of empire who has a comfortable life. He has a mistress and enough to eat, and he's an easy job. And at one point, somebody from Central Intelligence shows up and begins worrying about what are the plans of the barbarians. And he begins to round up people who are kind of homeless and shiftless and takes them to a hut near the granary. And the magistrate who's narrating says, I should never have gone down to the, I should never have picked up my lantern and gone down to the hut by the granary. But once I had picked up my lantern, I couldn't put it down. What did he see there? He saw torture. He saw rape. He saw maiming. And he saw this, and once he saw it, he couldn't put it down. But isn't that interesting that he said, I should never have picked up the lantern? Of course, because if you see, you can't unsee. When I was taking care of my mother, who lived in Glen Ellen, was a wealthy woman, this is years and years ago, 25 years ago, she'd broken her ankle. I was taking care of her. And she said to me very innocently, you have to think it was a more innocent moment. She said to me very innocently, Bill, what's this thing I've heard of called global warming? She had just heard it. And I didn't want to scare the shit out of the old lady, so I told her, I gave her a very mild version. I didn't say we're all going to be crisp in no time. I just gave her a very mild version. And she gave me a long, long frown. And she said, well, I'm sorry I asked. Exactly. Exactly. Because you asked, I told you. And because I told you, you can't unhear it. Now you know. So now you know that we have 2.5 million people in prison. Now you know that corporations own our electoral process, and even its own flawed terms, it's a Ponzi scheme and a kind of a casino. And you probably know, and if you don't know, I'll tell you this too, that before any of these candidates get vetted, that the 1% have paid for everything that allows them to be candidates in the first place, national candidates. So the amount of money that pours into this stuff before you and I even are on the table having any kind of choice is absurd and ridiculous. So we know this. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it? So you act. You have to do something. You have to stand up against it. You have to speak out. And we can spend some time talking about that. But the other thing I add to Mary Oliver's instructions for living a life is you have to doubt. And why is that? You have to doubt, because if you don't doubt, then in your certainty, you become dogmatic. You follow a kind of an orthodoxy instead of opening your eyes again and again. So what do I mean by that? You know what dogma is? You know what orthodoxy is? For example, you know the Monty Python film, The Life of Brian? You know that film?
Yes.
Get it on Netflix or Google it. The Life of Brian. It's a funny parody about a reluctant Messiah. And at one point he's standing on a rampart on a wall in a Middle East, or in Jerusalem or someplace. And his name is Brian. And he's shouting to the masses below, I'm not the Messiah. And they all shout back, you're not the Messiah. And he says, no, no, you have minds of your own. And they shout back, we have minds of our own. And one guy in the crowd says, it's funny, I don't feel like I have a mind of my own. Everybody says, shut up, you have a mind of your own. Okay. So that's dogma. That's dogma. And it brings to mind when I was first living in Chicago, my wife of 40 years had a law partner who wanted me to look at a Montessori school. She was considering sending her kid. So I looked at the school, it was fine. But the whole time we were looking at the school, the director kept saying, Maria Montessori would say that the children are doing such and such. Maria Montessori, who's the founder of the movement, would say the children are doing such and such. And she kept saying it over and over. I felt like I was being mesmerized or hypnotized into some cult. So I said to my friend, you know, don't drink the Kool-Aid. I was just kidding. But at the break, when the parents were having a snack, they began talking about the humanist psychologists Carl Rogers and Carl Jung. And apropos of that conversation, I said, you know, Jung once said, I'm glad I'm Jung and not a Jungian, because I can still change my mind. And the Montessori woman said, Maria Montessori said the same thing. And then I wanted to tell you. I mean, and that's what dogma does to us. It's not the dogma of the House Republicans that people like you have to worry about. It's your own dogma. It's the dogma of easy thinking, of easy belief. And so it's worth remembering that Jung was not a Jungian, and Marx was not a Marxist, and Jesus wasn't a Christian, and Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, and so on. That these things happen later, and that's the dogma, and that's the end of thought. What we have to do is rise up and remember that every day is an occasion to open your eyes, to consider the alternatives, to name yourself in opposition to injustice and evil and war and, and death, and to name yourself in favor of peace and love and joy and justice, and then to get busy in a project of repair. And at the beginning of every day, you have to remind yourself that this is who I want to be. I want to be a person who's got one foot firmly planted in the mud and muck of the world as it is, but one foot is striving forward to a world that could be, but is not yet. And that without that striving forward, I'm just a lump. I'm not making moral choices. I'm not being a good citizen or a good resident. I'm just a lump in the clay. But you have to get that dialectic going where one foot is firmly in the real world, rooted, so that you're not flying off in some fairyland in your head. But the other foot is, in fact, striving for a world that could be. That's every morning. And then every evening, you have to remind yourself, we're badly defeated today, but I'm going to take a rest and get up tomorrow morning and try it again. That's the only way that you can live, in my view, a life that is purposeful and that's thoughtful and that's managed by yourself. It's something that you have a responsibility to do. The great socialist Rosa Luxemburg, when she was in prison during World War I for her failure to support the German effort in World War I, and a lot of great people went to jail in World War I. All the great pacifists were in jail for refusing to support their own government in this imperial war. And Rosa Luxemburg found herself in jail, and she got a letter one day from a friend who said, how do you keep going? How do you keep getting up in the morning and fighting? How do you keep the struggle alive in your mind and in your spirit? And because things are so hard out here. And Luxemburg wrote back and said, first, stop whining. Because where does it take you? I mean, we can all whine, we can all be cynics. And in our day and age, being a cynic makes you kind of hip and kind of wise. But cynicism is a weapon of the status quo. There's no doubt in my mind. Cynicism is a weapon of the way things are. It requires courage and initiative to develop hope, but hope is a politics. So Luxemburg says, stop whining. And then she says, my main advice is be a mensch. M-E-N-S-C-H. Google it. It's Yiddish. And she says to her friend, be a mensch. And then she says, I can't define mensch for you, except to say, it means something like, love your own life enough to enjoy the sunrise and the sunset, to enjoy time with friends, to have a good meal, to go out on the evening, to take care of the children and the elders. Love your own life that much. But love the world enough to put your shoulder on history's wheel when history demands it. And working out that balance between loving yourself but not becoming a complete narcissist, and loving the world but not becoming a martyr, that's what makes a mensch. And that's what we should all try to be. We should all be a mensch. Thanks very much.